Now, President Trump says progress is being made in trade talks with Japan, but he played down the chances of an agreement during his current visit. He said he's had a great time watching sumo wrestling. Rupert Wingfield-Hayes reports.
It is a little different from the sort of wrestling Mr. Trump is used to seeing back in the States. Japan's national sport is steeped in tradition. One is that spectators are not supposed to sit on chairs. But tradition was set aside today as first Prime Minister Shinzo Abe came up to award a cup to the grand champion. And then, for the first time ever, a foreign leader was allowed onto the hallowed earth to present an even bigger cup. Inside, there was huge excitement about the famous guest. Outside, a little less so.
I wish he would respect our culture. He's our guest, but he's acting more like a king. They're giving him special treatment, letting him sit on a chair. I think it's too much.
President Trump is getting a lot of firsts during this trip. First to meet the new Japanese emperor, first to sit on a chair during a sumo tournament, and to present a special prize to the grand champion. It is, of course, not without reason. Japan is nervous that Mr. Trump is not quite as committed to his Asian ally as some of his predecessors, and that he could launch a trade war against Japan like he has against China. A tweet from Mr. Trump today demonstrates exactly why Japan is nervous. In it, he described recent North Korean missile tests as small weapons which disturbed some people, but not me. This is what those small weapons look like. They may not bother Mr. Trump, but they certainly do bother Japan, which is well within range. Japan is deeply sceptical of Mr. Trump's friendship with North Korean dictator Kim Jong-un, but the US president still appears to believe it can lead to a historic peace deal. Rupert Wingfield-Hayes, BBC News in Tokyo.
It's day two of President Trump's state visit to Japan. So far, it's been mostly ceremony over substance, and another full day of bonding with Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. The two played golf and attended a traditional sumo wrestling match where the president awarded the winner a 4.5-foot tall, 70-pound trophy that he had specially made for the event. CNN White House correspondent Caitlin Collins is in Tokyo. Caitlin, the president and the prime minister have been obviously very chummy so far, but Trump has also been tweeting about North Korea, saying that he's got no problem with Kim Jong-un firing short-range missiles. The Japanese do have a problem with that, and I'm wondering what kind of friction could that set up?
Yeah, Martin, this is the scenario we knew we were walking into with this trip, that it was going to be mostly about ceremony, but there are these key issues that are looming in the background, and the president put it front and center when he tweeted shortly before he went golfing with the prime minister, downplaying those recent missile tests from North Korea. Now, the president was essentially saying that they may concern some people, but they do not concern him. Of course, two people those missile tests have concerned are not only the National Security Advisor, John Bolton, who said they definitely violated those UN resolutions, but also the Prime Minister of Japan, who has been concerned for a long time about whether or not the president is going to keep a hard line against North Korea. Now, what the president made this all the more complicated was he took a shot at former Vice President Joe Biden in his tweet, downplaying those missile tests. And when Sarah Sanders was asked, is the president siding with a dictator over a former vice president, this is how she answered.
Can you explain why Americans should not be concerned that the President of the United States is essentially siding with a murderous authoritarian dictator over a former Vice President of the United States?
Chuck, the president's not siding with that, but I think they agree in their assessment of former Vice President Joe Biden. Again, the president's focus in this process is the relationship he has and making sure we continue on the path towards denuclearization.
Now, that tweet comes as two things. Joe Biden has been leading in polls, including one conducted by the Trump campaign in some key states that will be crucial to the president's victory in 2020. But also, when Bolton said that North Korea had violated those UN resolutions, he pointed out the fact that talks between the U.S. and North Korea have largely fallen apart ever since that second summit that the president had with Kim Jong-un in Hanoi. Now, the question is, what did he talk about the Prime Minister Abe with this? And that's the question that the president is going to be asked discussed very likely when he holds a press conference with the Prime Minister in a few hours. Martin?
Yeah, it's going to turn a lot more serious before this trip is done. Caitlin Collins, thank you very much. All right, I want to bring in Ron Brownstein, senior editor at The Atlantic, and Lisa Luhr, the national political reporter at The New York Times. Thank you both for being here.
Hey, Martin.
Ron, President Trump saying that he's got no problem with Kim Jong-un's actions. Obviously, the Japanese do have a problem with that. I'm wondering here, is this a strategy on the part of the president, in other words, to play down whatever the North Koreans may do? Because giving them attention only seems to feed them into doing more.
Well, I think he has climbed out pretty far on the limb of arguing that he alone, I alone can fix it, compared to earlier presidents. And so I think President Trump is very reluctant at every point, and we have seen this repeatedly, to acknowledge the bumps in the road, the reversals of course from North Korea. He has a lot invested in proving that he can make this work, which of course gives a lot of leverage to the other side in the negotiation. Prime Minister Abe, as Caitlin noted, you know, the Japanese have a very different view of the short-term, kind of near-term missile launches. But he has also invested a lot in convincing the Japanese that he can stay on the good side of President Trump and avoid some of the conflicts that we are seeing with other traditional allies. So there's kind of a convergence of interests here on both sides to kind of minimize what others have accurately, including Abe himself, have noted is a more disturbing development.
Yeah, I mean, Lisa, it is interesting what Ron points out. You've got the president being nice to a dictator, and you've got the Japanese prime minister being nice to the president. But so much nice could really end up wrong here, especially even for the president, right?
Well, look, whether it's a strategy or not by President Trump, it's certainly a strategy by the Japanese. I think what world leaders have figured out about our president is that flattery is not the window dressing, it's kind of the whole game. And that's why you see them really rolling out the red carpet for the president in Japan. He's giving the President's Cup at a sumo match. He's the first world leader to meet the new emperor, and that they're playing golf, and that's by design. The president is someone who believes very strongly in the power of the one-on-one relationship to cut the deal. And so the Japanese, even though they have real and legitimate disputes with this administration, certainly over North Korea, but also over trade, they're trying to cultivate this relationship as much as possible in hopes of being able to sway the president in some way through that kind of dynamic.
Right. I guess I get the logic there. Let's turn to another potential hotspot, Iran. Have a listen to Republican Congresswoman Liz Cheney's reaction to President Trump's announcement that he is planning to send around 1,500 more U.S. troops to the Middle East to counter what he says is the increased threat from Iran. Take a listen.
It is the right move. And when you look at what we've seen in terms of the threat level, what we've seen in terms of what the Iranians are now doing, and I want to be careful not to talk about classified material and information. There's no question but that this threat, as Chairman Thornberry said, is not business as usual. And it's very important for the Iranians to understand that we'll do what's necessary to deter them from attacking us or our interests, and that we'll do what's necessary to make sure they understand we aren't going to simply sit back and allow them to take action that will put our people in harm's way.
Lisa, do you think she's speaking for the majority of Republicans or supporters of the president on this?
Well, look, I think the Republican Party is fairly split on this privately, but publicly, I doubt you'll hear that many Republicans coming out against President Trump, because you rarely hear that many Republicans coming out against President Trump, and that's a reflection of domestic politics and the hold he has over the base. But I certainly think there's concerns on both sides of the aisle that the situation with Iran has become fairly tenuous and could spiral out of control pretty quickly. And so I think that is a view shared by some Republicans, though I don't expect we'll hear it very loudly.
Right. I will say 1,500 troops is not a great deal, so it isn't necessarily on a war footing. But let me ask you this, Ron. You know, we've got a president then who downplays what a dictator is doing with his missiles, but then at the same time seems to be getting very hawkish on Iran. And, you know, the mixed message, the unfocused policy here, it's a problem, is it not, for what other world leaders are supposed to believe or not?
Well, I think what they have come to believe is that there is no through line through the policy except for kind of the predilections and the ideological preferences of the president. I mean, that's what they've kind of come to understand, and that's why you see, for example, as we're talking about, why Abe has been really so abject in his efforts to cultivate Trump, because he realizes that Japan auto imports could be as much under threat as the consistent threats against EU auto imports, and he is trying to avoid that through the personal relationship. I don't think anybody is expecting consistency on this point. And look, one thing we know about President Trump is he was a critic of U.S. military engagement in the Middle East. In the end, I think he is going to be very reluctant to go too far with Iran. But as we said, the threat is more events spiraling out of control. I mean, he has talked about, for example, that he is the one who is moderating John Bolton. But he, you know, it's not that he is necessarily someone who feels comfortable marching toward confrontation, but he does not exactly have a scalpel with which he conducts foreign policy, and that can get out of control.
No, he does not. Lisa Lerer and Ron Brownstein, thank you very much. You both have great insights. Appreciate it.
Thank you.